بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. فإن الجميع شملهم اسم العدالة والضبط إلا أن المرتبة الأولى فيهم من الصفات المرجحة ما يقتضي تقديم روايتهم على التي تليها، وفي التي تليها من قوة الضبط ما يقتضي تقديمها على الثالثة، وهي الثالثة مقدمة على رواية من يعد ما ينفرد به حسنا، كمحمد بن إسحاق عن عاصم بن عمر عن جابر، وعمر بن شعيب عن أبيه عن جده، وقس على هذه المراتب ما يشبهها. After presenting the categories of Ṣaḥīḥ, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he now says, فَإِنَّ الْجَمِيعَ شَمِلَهُمْ اسْمُ الْعَدَالَةِ وَالضَّبْطِ. He's explaining that all the narrators in these examples that he has presented, every narrator combines the qualities of adala and dhabt. Every narrator is honest, he was reliable, and he also had dhabt, he had good retentive skills. Now here, if you look in the text, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he says, Ismul adala wa dhabt. So he's simply using the word dhabt, and he's not qualifying this term with the word tamam. But when he was presenting the definition, you remember he said that it's integral, it's essential that the narrator has to have tamud dhabt. So here he is not saying tamud dhabt. And we mentioned that Alama Qasim ibn Qutlubugha rahimahullah, he was not pleased with this. So again here he outlines and he says, هذا ظاهر في أن المعتبر في حد الصحيح مطلق الضبط لا الموصوف بالتمام. This here is an al-Qawl al-Mubtakar on page 51. That this is clear that what's essential and what's considered in the definition of Ṣaḥīḥ is mutlaq al-dhabt, that the narrator should be able to retain the narration. It does not mean that he has to have tam al-dhabt, lal mawsuf bit tamam. So here Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he could not even have said tam al-dhabt. Why? Because had he said tam al-dhabt, then so many narrators from the second and the third category, they would not have even qualified to be in these groups. They would not qualify to come under the category of Ṣaḥīḥ. Suhail ibn Abi Salih, for example, he does not have good memory. So the chain with him would not have been deserving to be in the category of Ṣaḥīḥ, even though in the second category, in the second level, it would not have been deserving to be within this main domain of a Ṣaḥīḥ. However, Alama Laqani rahimahullah, he tried to respond to the statement of Alama Qasim rahimahullah, and he says, no, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, even though he did not mention the clause of tamam here, he did mention it earlier, isn't it? So Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he felt that since he did mention it, now there is no need for him to repeat it, but he does intend tamam. So you can see the word al-dhabt, it has an alif lam. So this alif lam will be for ahd. And this means that by now the reader will know what the author is intending, and therefore the minute he sees the word al-dhabt, he will understand it as it was explained earlier. And Alama Laqani rahimahullah, he argues that if dhabt is not qualified with this word tam, then there's not going to be any difference between Ṣaḥīḥ and Hasan narrations. Because the very distinction between what's considered as Ṣaḥīḥ and what's considered as Hasan is based on the strength of memory or the accuracy of preserving the narration. So therefore, he mentions that it's clear that the word dhabt is qualified even though the qualification is not emphatically mentioned here. Why? Because it has been mentioned earlier, and here the word al-dhabt has an alif lam, and this alif lam is for ahd, so it means that the reader will know what type of dhabt Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is speaking about. But then, how is it that the names of weak narrators have been mentioned in the examples of Ṣaḥīḥ in the second and in the third category? Because their dhabt, surely it's not tam. So the answer to that is that now it's evident that when Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, when he mentions the word tam wal dabt, then he does not mean that the narrator has to have absolute good memory. So it does not mean that his memory has to be strictly perfect. Rather, he simply means that the narrator must have a relatively good memory that he could retain and remember the narration. He hardly makes any mistakes. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah now explains, he says, إِلَّا أَنَّ الْمَرْتَبَةَ الْأُولَى فيهم من الصفات المرجحة ما يقتضي تقديم روايتهم على التي تليها. That all these narrators, they adil and they have a dabt, but those who are in the first category, those who are from the higher status, where scholars have even graded their chains as asahul asanid, they have such qualities that would necessitate that you have to give preference to their chains over the narrations of those who come in the second category. وفي التي تليها من قوة الضبط ما يقتضي تقديمها على الثالثة. Those who come in the second category, they have these kind of qualities which would necessitate that you have to give preference to their narrations over those who come in the third category. وهي الثالثة مقدمة على رواية من يعد ما ينفرد به حسنة. The third category, it's the lowest category of Ṣaḥīḥ, but it still made it to be within the domain of Ṣaḥīḥ. So therefore, whichever narrations are transmitted by the narrators of the third category, their narrations will be preferred over the narrations of those who, when they narrate something, then those narrations would be graded as Hasan. So until now, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he brought examples of narrations that are all Ṣaḥīḥ. But he showed that you have these different levels and categories and status among Ṣaḥīḥ narrations. And now to further strengthen his argument, he's explaining that whatever is in the third category, they are going to be stronger than those narrations which are also accepted. Because you remember when we are speaking about maqbul narrations, then Ṣaḥīḥ and Hasan narrations, they are all accepted. So we'll explain more about Hasan later on. For now, you can just understand that it means those narrations which are accepted, but they are not on par with those narrations which are Ṣaḥīḥ. So whatever made it to be Ṣaḥīḥ, definitely it's going to be stronger than those narrations which did not make it to be Ṣaḥīḥ and they are only graded as Hasan. So to illustrate this here, he brings examples. He brings two examples. The first example is كمحمد بن إسحاق عن عاصم بن عمر عن جابر. So Muhammad ibn Ishaq, when he is narrating from Asim ibn Umar, who's narrating from Jabir, a narration like this here would be graded as Hasan. So if you look at this particular sanad, all the narrators are reliable. But the only issue is that Muhammad ibn Ishaq is a mudallis. So now mudallis is a technical term. We'll discuss it in the future lessons on page 85 inshallah. For now, just understand it like this here, that it is a term which is used for someone who gives the impression that he heard something from another person when in fact he did not hear that. So because he's using ambiguous words, like he met a person, so you know that he narrated all those narrations from this person. However, now there's one narration which he did not hear from this person, but he's not clearly mentioning that he did not hear it. And he's also not clearly mentioning that he did hear it. He's using ambiguous words. So some people, they did not do this with any ulterior motives. And others, they were doing this here. They were quoting words like this, so they wanted to give this impression that they heard from this particular sheikh, that narration. So this narrator, Muhammad ibn Ishaq, he is quoting here, you can see it's an Asim ibn Umar. So because he's using this word an when he is quoting from his teacher and he is a mudallis, so therefore this narration is going to be regarded as weaker. It's not going to make it to be as Ṣaḥīḥ. But although he was a mudallis, he was reliable. Yes, there are scholars who spoke about his aqidah, etc., but all of those are baseless. So therefore, this narration is just under Ṣaḥīḥ. It just did not make it to be Ṣaḥīḥ. But here this narrator Muhammad ibn Ishaq clearly mentioned that he heard this here from Asim ibn Umar. If he used a word like qala or qala li, or he used the word like sami'tu or haddathana, then it would have actually been graded as a Ṣaḥīḥ narration. Just because he used the word an when he was narrating, so therefore it's being graded as Hasan and it is not being graded as Ṣaḥīḥ. Then with regards to the second example that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah gives here, so he says, وَعَمِّرْ ibn Shu'ayb عن أبيه عن جده. So this here is a very popular chain and it comes frequently in the Sunan, in Sunan Abi Dawud and Sunan Tirmidhi. Those of you who completed final year, you probably know this chain by memory because of how often it comes. So Amr ibn Shu'ayb is narrating from his father, who is narrating from his grandfather. So now to understand what the meaning of this chain is, you're going to first have to understand who the father is and who the grandfather is. So even if you are getting the notes for this year, please write down these names here, that the lineage is as follows. Amr, who is the son of Shu'ayb, who is the son of Muhammad, who is the son of Abdullah, who is the son of Amr, who is the son of As. So Amr ibn Shu'ayb ibn Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As. Now you know that Abdullah ibn Amr, he was a Sahabi, isn't it? So the sanad now, look at the sanad. It's Amr ibn Shu'ayb, right? So Amr, who is the son of Shu'ayb. Now he is saying an abihi. Now whose father is this going to? And then it's going an jaddihi. So there's lots of discussion concerning this chain and there's many questions that surround it. Firstly also you must note that this whole thing where scholars quote from father, quoting from grandfather, inshallah towards the end of the kitab, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah actually brings a dedicated chapter for it. But here, at this point, just to understand what regards to this particular sanad, so there are so much different views that have been mentioned. Firstly, whether Amr ibn Shu'ayb himself as a person, was he reliable? So some scholars, they doubted whether he passed the quality test of adala and dhabt. Although majority of the scholars, they preferred that he was indeed reliable. Secondly, whether Amr narrated from the notes of his grandfather or whether he actually heard from his grandfather. Thirdly, then the whole discussion of the words an jaddihi, whether the pronoun in jaddihi, it's referring to the grandfather of Amr, who is Muhammad, or is it referring to the grandfather of Shu'ayb? Who's the grandfather of Shu'ayb? It's Abdullah ibn Amr. So if it is the former, that means if it's Amr's grandfather, then the grandfather of Amr was not a Sahabi, but rather he was a Tabi'i. And therefore, if he is quoting something from the Prophet ﷺ directly, then it means there is a missing link. The narration will be regarded as Mursal. One point which comes to mind that I should highlight here, so mashallah, all of you, because you are doing this kitab for the second, third, fourth time, if it's teaching this kitab, you know, you have to take into consideration the audience. So if you're teaching it to a beginner, then you will teach it on an easier level. But mashallah, so in fact, most of you are doing it for the second and third time. So a point to highlight here about one of the commentaries of Nuzha. In an-Naḍar, there it's mentioned that Ibn Adi assumed that the pronoun refers to the grandfather of Amr, to Muhammad. Now Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Amr, like we're saying, that he was not a Sahabi. Therefore, if he is transmitting directly from the Prophet ﷺ, then such a chain is Mursal. So this is what's mentioned in an-Naḍar, that who is making this claim? Ibn Adi is making this claim. However, if you go to Al-Kamil, because that's what Ibn Adi wrote, you're going to find there that Ibn Adi rahimahullah, he quoted many different statements. So just to also show you the huge difference, he quotes some scholars expressing how weak this chain is. For example, he quotes from Sa'id ibn Abdul Aziz, كان الزهري يلعن من يحدث بهذا الحديث. This is in Al-Kamil fi Du'afai al-Rijal in volume 6 on page 201. Imam Zuhri would curse a person who has to quote like this here. And he quotes from Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan that he said, Hadith Amr ibn Shu'ayb wahin indana. That this here is extremely weak according to us. But then in contrast to that, he quotes a view of Ishaq ibn Rahuya where he said, وحكى حسن بن سفيان عن إسحاق بن راهويه قال عمرو بن شعيب عن أبيه عن جده كأيوب عن نافع عن ابن عمر. Now one view of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah is that Asahul Asanid is Ayyub an Nafi' an ibn Umar. So can you see what's happening? That Ishaq ibn Rahuya, he is explaining what a strong chain this here is. That he is raising it to that level. So Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah here, he is presenting it as an example for something that's in the middle. That it's not extremely weak and it's not Sahih. It comes in this middle category of Hasan. But some scholars, they are pushing it right down, and other scholars, they are raising it so high. Nevertheless, that's not the point. Like I said, there are so many different views. I actually want to show you what's mentioned here in an-Naḍar. So few pages later, Ibn Adi rahimahullah, then he quotes. He says, وَعَمْرُ بْنُ شُعَيْبٍ فِي نَفْسِهِ ثِقَةٌ. Amr ibn Shu'ayb as a person, he is a reliable person. إِلَّا أَنَّهُ إِذَا رَوَى عَنْ أَبِيهِ عَنْ جَدِّهِ عَلَى مَا نَسَبَهُ أَحْمَدُ بْنُ حَنْبَلٍ. Can you see? He's saying that this here is the view of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. That إِلَّا أَنَّهُ إذا روى عن أبيه عن جده على ما نسبه أحمد بن حنبل يكون ما يرويه عن أبيه عن جده عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم مرسلا. So this here is in volume 6 on page 205. So you can clearly see that Ibn Adi is attributing this view to Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. He is not mentioning it from his own side. He's not mentioning his own view. He's simply quoting what is attributed to Imam Ahmad. And then he says, لأن جده عنده. What's the meaning of عنده? عند الإمام أحمد. The grandfather, according to Imam Ahmad, هو محمد بن عبد الله بن عمرو. So, and then he says, Muhammad ليس له صحبة. So therefore it's going to be mursal. But now in Im'an an-Naḍar, these words are being attributed to Ibn Adi. But like I'm saying, I just quoted to you the text. You can clearly see Ibn Adi rahimahullah is quoting this from Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. And the proof that Ibn Adi did not hold this view like Imam Ahmad rahimahullah is that there are so many places in Al-Kamil where Ibn Adi quotes this chain and he makes sure to outline that the grandfather is the Sahabi. So there are many examples. I'll just share one or two. In volume 3, on page 322, he quotes عن عمرو بن شعيب عن أبيه عن جده عبد الله بن عمرو أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال أعتى الناس على الله من قتل في حرم الله إلى آخر الحديث. So can you see that it's very clearly mentioned here عن جده عبد الله بن عمرو. And there are many other examples. Just to give you one more example, in volume 5 on page 248, the whole sanadi quotes, which links to Ibn Lahi'a, قال حدثنا عمرو بن شعيب عن أبيه عن جده عبد الله بن عمرو بن العاص أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال أيما رجل نكح امرأة فدخل بها فلا يحل له نكاح ابنتها. So even if you have to assume here that maybe these are the words of the narrators, and it's not his own words, he would have highlighted that this is incorrect and the grandfather is not Abdullah ibn Amr, rather the grandfather is Muhammad. But he did not do that, so that shows that he shares this view. So if you have Im'an an-Naḍar, then you can go make a small footnote there that Ibn Adi rahimahullah, he quotes that statement and he does not mention that statement from his own side. So this here is also just to show you how vigilant you need to be when you see these things being attributed to scholars, how we need to verify references. There is a whole topic and discussion on this here, but I don't want to digress into all of that now. So here Ibn Adi rahimahullah is quoting it like this from Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. But Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, he claims that Imam Ahmad rahimahullah would accept the narration of Amr ibn Shu'ayb. Imam Bukhari rahimahullah himself also clearly mentions that the marja of the dhamir in jaddihi, the antecedent of the pronoun in the words his grandfather, it refers to the father of Amr, who is Shu'ayb. And Shu'ayb's grandfather is who? He is the Sahabi Abdullah ibn Amr. So this year, Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah quotes it. He quotes the statement of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah regarding Imam Ahmad rahimahullah in Ishaq like this year. So, قال أبو عيسى حديث عبد الله بن عمرو بن العاص حديث حسن وعمرو بن شعيب هو ابن محمد بن عبد الله بن عمرو بن العاص قال محمد بن إسماعيل. So when he says قال محمد بن إسماعيل, who is he referring to? He's referring to Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. Imam Bukhari rahimahullah said رأيت أحمد وإسحاق وذكر غيرهما يحتجون بحديث عمرو بن شعيب قال Muhammad. Now this here is the view of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. So there he said that Imam Bukhari is saying, I clearly witnessed myself, I saw Imam Ahmad rahimahullah in Ishaq, and he also mentioned others that they used the narration of Amr ibn Shu'ayb as a hujjah. Then Imam Bukhari rahimahullah said, وَقَدْ سَمِعَ شُعَيْبُ بْنُ مُحَمَّدٍ مِنْ جَدِّهِ عَبْدِ اللَّهِ ibn Amr. So can you see? So this is how Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah quoted the statement of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. Now look at Tahdhib al-Tahdhib. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he quotes the statement of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah like this here. وقال البخاري رأيت أحمد بن حنبل وعلي بن المديني وإسحاق بن راهوية وأبا عبيدة وعامة أصحابنا يحتجون بحديث عمرو بن شعيب عن أبيه عن جده ما تركه أحد من المسلمين. So there he took all those names and he said there ما تركه أحد من المسلمين. Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah, he quoted the statement of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah regarding Imam Ahmad and Ishaq. But then Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah, he quotes a completely different reason, and he says وَمَنْ تَكَلَّمَ فِي حَدِيثِ عَمْرِ بْن شُعَيْبٍ إِمَّا ضَعَّفَهُ لِأَنَّهُ يُحَدِّثُ عَنْ صَحِيفَةِ جَدِّهِ. So you remember that his grandfather Abdullah ibn Amr, he would write hadith, isn't it? So some scholars, they felt that he found his grandfather's notes, and then he would just narrate from there without checking the authenticity. You remember we quoted previously that there was a possibility that someone could have distorted it, etc. كأنهم رأوا أنه لم يسمع هذه الأحاديث من جده. So they felt that he did not hear these examples directly from his grandfather. So that is a completely different reason. I told you there is so much to discuss about this chain. Nevertheless, Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah, he graded many of the ahadith of Amr ibn Shu'ayb as Hasan, and he even graded some of the narrations as Hasanun Sahihun. After presenting these two examples, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah then says وَقِسْ عَلَى هَذِهِ الْمَرَاتِبِ مَا يُشْبِهُهَا. That now you make your own qiyas, you perform your own analogy of these ranks. What will be on par with these narrations? They are going to be inferior to the third category of Ṣaḥīḥ. Thereafter he reminds the reader what will be added to the highest category. So he says وَالْمَرْتَبَةُ الْأُولَى هِيَ الَّتِي أَطْلَقَ عَلَيْهَا بَعْضُ الْأَئِمَّةِ أَنَّهَا أَصَحُّ الْأَسَانِيدِ. Whenever you find any scholar from the earlier times claiming that a particular chain is Asahul Asanid, then add those into the first category. After this long discussion, now Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah concludes by stating the preferred view. And what's the preferred view? He said, وَالْمُعْتَمَدْ عَدَمُ الْإِطْلَاقِ لِتَرْجُمَةٍ مُعَيَّنَةٍ مِنْهَا. That there is no particular narration that can be graded as the most authentic. وَالْمُعْتَمَدْ عَدَمُ الْإِطْلَاقِ لِتَرْجُمَةٍ مُعَيَّنَةٍ مِنْهَا. Alama al-Laqani rahimahullah, he explains that when he uses the word al-mu'tamad, then it's not only the preferred view according to Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, but this is the preferred view according to all the latter-day scholars. يعني أن المعتمد عليه من مذاهب متأخر المحدثين عدم الإطلاق على رجال ترجمة معينة أنها أصح الأسانيد. And he gets this from Alam ibn Salah rahimahullah, because he mentioned in his muqaddama ولهذا نرى الإمساك عن الحكم لإسناد أو حديث بأنه الأصح على الإطلاق. So Mullah Ali Qari rahimahullah, he explains the reason, and he says والحاصل أن القول المختار أنه لا يطلق على إسناد معين بأنه أصح الأسانيد مطلقا. That the preferred view is that we cannot claim on one particular chain that this here mutlaqan, it is the most authentic of all chains. لأن تفاوت مراتب الصحة مترتب على تمكن الإسناد من شرط الصحة. That the discrepancies in authenticity, it's based on how well the sanad has the conditions of صحة. فيعز وجود أعلى درجات القبول في كل فرد من ترجمة واحدة بالنسبة لجميع الرواه. And then he says كذا حققه العراقي وصرح به غير واحد من المحدثين. وقال النووي إنه المختار لأن الإطلاق يتوقف على وجود أعلى درجات القبول من الضبط والعدالة ونحوهما في كل فرد من رواة السند المحكوم له بالنسبة لجميع الرواة الموجودين في عصره. ويعز اجتماع سلسلة كذلك. Like I explained to you about Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, and then having so the greatest Sahabi, and then you have the greatest Tabi'i narrating from the greatest Sahabi, and then the greatest person in the next level who is transmitting. إذ لا يعلم أو يظن أن هذا الراوي هذا أعلى الصفات حتى لا يوازي بينه وبين كل فرد من جميع من عاصره. This guy is in his commentary on page 265. And then Mullah Ali Qari rahimahullah, he echoes that suggestion of Imam Hakim rahimahullah, that for Asahul Asanid you should rather restrict it to a particular companion or to a certain locality rather than mentioning that it is general. فإن كان لابد من الإطلاق فيقيد كل ترجمة بصحابيها أو بالبلد التي منها أصحاب تلك الترجمة فإن يقال أصح أسانيد فلان أو فلانين. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah concludes this chapter by mentioning that okay, we cannot say that one tarjuma is one sanad is the most authentic, but we do get this additional benefit that we can put all of these into the highest level of صحيح narrations. نعم يستفاد من مجموع ما أطلق الأئمة عليه ذلك الرجحيته على ما لم يطلقوه. That the benefit that we do derive from the statements and comments and remarks of the earlier scholars is that when they said that this is the most authentic, we know now that this narration will get preference over those narrations which has not been graded like that. Hanafis, we accept that the narration may be preferred over another narration due to the strength of the narration. Alama Amidi Rahimah Usul al-Fiqh on page 303. And alhamdulillah, the PDF has been posted on the group, so you can go there and check it out. He said, وَأَمَّا الَّذِي يَرْجِعُ إِلَى حَالِ الرَّاوِي فَوُجُوهُ. And thereafter he says, أَحَدُهَا وَحَاسِلُهُ إن كمل حال الراوي كان الظن بروايته أقوى والسهو والغلط عنه أبعد فكان أولى. One is you look at the narrator, his strength, was he an imam, was he a hafiz, how strong he was. Second, ومنها أن يكون أحدهما أعدل وأورع وأضبط لأن غلبة الظن بروايته أقوى. However, this does not mean that the minute you find a narration that is transmitted by someone who is so strong, and he in turn is relating from someone who is so strong, who in turn is quoting from someone who is so strong, then this becomes the most authentic of chains, and therefore you have to immediately prefer this over the other, because there is so much more to the science. There are so many other factors that will be considered before you can conclude which narration is the most suitable, which narration will be the one that you should prefer. So many times, although narrations are graded as the most authentic, there will be preferences given to others. You know that famous incident where Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he gave preference to asanid that were presented by fuqaha. So Mullah Ali Qari rahimahullah, he quotes it here in his commentary on page 262. وَمُنَاظَرَةُ أَبِي حَنِيفَةَ مَعَ الْأَوْزَاعِ مَعْرُوفَةً رَوَاهَ الْحَازِمِ. And he's saying that the Alama Hazmi rahimahullah has quoted this here, where Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, this discussion on Raf'ul Yadayn. So Imam Auza'i rahimahullah, he presented his chain. He says, كيف لم يصح وقد حدثني الزهري عن سالم عن أبيه. So you can see that's Asahul Asanid. Yet Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he says, حدثنا حماد عن إبراهيم عن علقمة والأسود عن عبد الله بن مسعود أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان لا يرفع يديه إلا عند افتتاح الصلاة ثم لا يعود. So Imam Auza'i رحمه الله told him أحدثك عن الزهري عن سالم عن أبيه وتقول حدثني حماد عن إبراهيم. So Imam Abu Hanifa رحمه الله said كان حماد أفقه من الزهري وكان إبراهيم أفقه من سالم وعلقمة ليس بدون ابن عمر في الفقه. So can you see? So, yeah, you give preference on the faqah. Now, yes, there are some scholars who doubted the authenticity of this incident. However, Muwafaq al-Makki, who you know is famously known as Alama Khawarizmi, he narrated it with his sanad. Alama Qasim ibn Qutlubagha, rahimahullah, he alluded to it in his footnotes. So, in the sanad, you have a person, Sulaiman ibn Dawood, al-Shadhakuni. So, some scholars regarded him as extremely weak and even a liar, but others considered him as reliable. But nonetheless, our objective here is to show that he gave preference to the narration. Why? Because it was being transmitted by fuqaha. Worthless. Nevertheless, whether this incident is true or not, the principle according to the Hanafis is that for a narration of fiqh, so where the text is a fiqh, if it is transmitted by fuqaha, then that will be preferred. Alama ibn al-Hammam rahimahullah said, فَرُجِّحَ بِفِقْهِ الرُّوَاهِ, that sometimes it will be preferred because of the faqahat of the narrators. So from the very beginning, Hanafis, they adopted this principle of Alama ibn al-Hammam rahimahullah. Like you can see, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. Likewise, Abu Bakr al-Jassasi says, وكان أبو الحسن الكرخي رحمه الله يقول إن مذهب أبي حنيفة في الخاص والعام أنه متى اتفق الفقهاء على استعمال أحدهما واختلفوا في استعمال الآخر كل ما اتفق على استعمال حكمه منهما قاضيا على ما اختلف فيه. And then he says وقد رأيت هذا المعنى لعيسى بن أبان أيضا وذلك نحو ما روي عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قال فيما سقط السماء العشر فهذا خبر متفق على استعماله في الخمسة الأوسق وما روي عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قال ليس فيما دون خمسة أوسق صدقة مختلف في استعماله فكان خبر إيجاب العشر مطلقا قاضيا عليه ناسخا له. In fact, not only Hanafis but Imam Waqi' rahimahullah, he also gave preference to a narration of